Welcome to the Council on Foreign Relations, Religion, and Foreign Policy webinar series. I'm Irina Faskanis, Vice President of the National Program and Outreach here at CFR. Thank you for joining us. As a reminder, today's webinar is on the record, and the video and transcript will be available on CFR's website, cfr.org. As always, CFR takes no institutional positions on matters of policy. We're delighted to be co-sponsoring the discussion today with Georgetown University's Berkley Center for Religion, Peace, and World Affairs, and to have David Hunsicker, Melissa Nozell, and Knox Thames here with us to discuss the future of strategic religious engagement in U.S. foreign policy. Today's discussion will be moderated by Peter Mandaville. Peter Mandaville is a senior research fellow and project leader of the Strategic Religious Engagement Hub at the Berkley Center for Religion, Peace, and World Affairs. He is also a professor of government and politics at the Schar School of Policy and Government at George Mason University, where he directs the AbuSulayman Center for Global Islamic Studies. In addition, he is a non-resident senior fellow at the Atlantic Council's Freedom and Prosperity Center. He's previously served at USAID, the United States Institute of Peace, and the U.S. State Department, and he serves on CFR's Religion Advisory Committee. So Peter is going to take the conversation away, introduce our distinguished panel, and then we will turn to all of you for your comments and to share your thoughts. So Peter, with that, over to you.
Great. Thanks so much, Irina, and thank you to you and CFR for hosting this conversation today, and a big thanks and a big welcome to all of you in the audience for joining us today. As members of this audience, more so than many others will be aware, the United States government has a fairly extensive track record in terms of efforts to reach out to, engage with, and build partnerships with religious actors and faith-based organization in the domains of diplomacy, development, and defense and peace building. These efforts go back many decades, stretching back at least until the early 1980s, or the late 1980s rather, when at the United States Institute of Peace, which of course is an independent but congressionally chartered public institution, a program dedicated to exploring and understanding the role that religious leaders play in resolving conflicts and building peace around the world was established, and USIP became a genuine leader and pathbreaker in that space. The development and humanitarian realms have also been well represented in these efforts. Certainly since USAID opened its doors in 1961, the agency has been partnering with faith-based organizations to implement its programs around the world. But this effort became much more systematic under the George W. Bush administration, when in 2002, a Center for Faith-Based and Community Initiatives was established at USAID. The State Department has been in the mix as well. 2013 in particular was something of a halcyon year for this work. That year rather, saw the release of a White House National Security Council national strategy for engaging religious leaders in the context of U.S. foreign policy, as well as the establishment at the State Department of a new Office of Religion and Global Affairs. 2023 saw the release out of USAID of that agency's first ever strategic religious engagement policy, a significant milestone in the interagency world because it represented the first time that any U.S. government agency had developed and publicly released a document making the case for and explaining why the U.S. government needs to deliver or develop higher levels of religious literacy and increase the government's capacity to engage and work with religious actors in the foreign policy realm. As a result of extensive restructuring of the U.S. federal government since the current Trump administration came in January 2025, we find ourselves today, however, in a situation in which the dedicated institutional capacity for engaging and working with religious actors in these fields no longer exists. USAID was dismantled by the administration last spring. The United States Institute of Peace's Religion and Peacebuilding program, like much of its other ongoing work, was closed down, and the reforms and restructuring at the U.S. State Department also meant that there was no longer any dedicated capacity for this work in our lead diplomatic agency. So this provides a moment for us to pause and take stock of what we've learned from these efforts over the years, but also to give some thought to the future of this work. If and when there might come in the opportunity of future to rebuild this capacity, what should it look like? I'm delighted that we have with us today something of an all-star panel to help us think through these questions. We're joined today by Melissa Nozell, who worked for many years on the Religion and Inclusive Societies program at the United States Institute of Peace, so can speak in particular to the peace building dimension of things. She's currently a Strategic Religious Engagement Fellow at the Berkley Center for Religion, Peace, and World Affairs at Georgetown University. She's joined on the panel by Dave Hunsicker, who is currently the Pennsylvania State Director for Make Voters the Donors, but before that worked for many years as a senior conflict and peacebuilding advisor at the United States Agency for International Development, including a period of time spent helping to lead USAID's Center for Faith-Based Partnerships. And finally, rounding out the panel, we have Knox Thames, who, as many of you will know, worked for many years at the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom before holding roles at the State Department's Office of International Religious Freedom, followed by roles or positions at the U.S. Institute of Peace and Pepperdine University. He is presently the executive director of the Everett Center for Global Religious Freedom at Dallas Baptist University. We are delighted to have all of you joining us in the audience today, not least of all because we know that many of you have individually or on behalf of the organizations that you represent observed and been part of the story of the development of U.S. strategic religious engagement capacity. And so for that reason, we'll be particularly eager to hear your questions and to hear your thoughts and advice on what the future of this work might look like. So in order to start us off, I'm going to hand things over to Melissa Nozell. Melissa, over to you.
Thank you so much, Peter. Thank you, Irina, and to everyone at CFR for hosting this conversation today. And thanks again to all of you in the audience for joining us. And I'm particularly looking forward to the conversation that we'll have with all of you. So by way of a bit of background on the Strategic Religious Engagement Hub, we were founded about a year ago in the context that Peter shared when we realized and understood that there had been many changes across the administration that, in fact, reduced the capacity of strategic religious engagement, SRE, within the U.S. government foreign affairs. And so we realized that it's a particular moment in time in which some of the institutional capacity was being lost, perhaps, and some of the documents, the resources, trainings that had existed were no longer. And it was a particular moment, this inflection point, where we saw an opportunity to come together and to reflect on this moment for SRE in U.S. government, but also consider ways forward. So to that end, the SRE Hub seeks to maintain the institutional memory, to document it, to make sure that that's not lost while websites are no longer there, et cetera. We're collecting and curating relevant SRE documents. We are convening practitioners in this space, NGO partners who have worked adjacent to government, those who had worked previously within government and SRE, and even current and former officials, to think about where we are at this particular moment, and then to explore what some of those potential pathways forward could be. More specifically, some of the things that we've been working on in the SRE Hub is we have a digital repository where some of those documents that had previously been publicly available, easily accessible across the interagency and by affiliated entities or adjacent entities are no longer available because their websites are down or they're simply otherwise not easily accessible. And so the repository is a place where we've gradually been putting documents like Peter mentioned, the SRE policy from USAID. We'll be putting training materials that have been used in the past to train policymakers, various resources like that that will be and are already made available through the SRE digital repository. We are also working on a web essay and oral history project to make sure that the stories and the histories of SRE and of the broader religious engagement story of U.S. government is in existence. It's captured somewhere across time. And so that will be an interactive website that's being built out now. We have over 30 interviews that we've conducted with folks who have been contributing to this space since over 4 decades ago, who were there in the earliest days of SRE. And we're planning to launch that as a resource on the Berkley Center website in the next few months, and invite you to stay tuned as we have rollout events on that. Then we have a blog series, The Missing Dimension, a nod to Dr. Doug Johnston's book of the same name, where we are capturing reflections from experts, policymakers, practitioners who have engaged in SRE on their reflections working in this space recently and historically, as well as potential opportunities for the future of SRE. And we also host convenings, again, with policymakers, current and former, with practitioners, faith-based organization representatives, to reflect at this moment in time and consider pathways forward and to better understand some of the gaps at the moment in their work, particularly from faith-based organization perspectives, those who've been working internationally and who have been impacted in different ways by some of the shifts within the administrations and related funding. And finally, another resource that I will highlight that we've been working on developing and making available once again is a series on the religion, peace, and conflict country profiles. It's something that the U.S. Institute of Peace had developed. It's an outgrowth of a resource that USIP had on, it was a religious landscape mapping series where we had a deep dive report, a lengthy report on the context of and an analysis of religion in peace and conflict dynamics in a given country. And we at the U.S. Institute of Peace had received feedback, particularly from policymakers as well as others, that it would also be useful to have a quicker take analysis to better understand where religion fits into both peace and conflict dynamics. And so the shorthand is RPAC, the Religion, Peace, and Conflict Country Profiles, came out of that need, as expressed particularly by U.S. policymakers, to have this shorter, more succinct analysis of religion in peace and conflict dynamics. The Institute of Peace had developed about half a dozen of these RPACs. Since they're no longer available on the USIP website, they're now available, two are already available through the Berkley Center's website. On Bosnia and Herzegovina and Myanmar are available again, that had been developed previously by the Institute of Peace. We'll be posting others in future, and we are now building upon that idea, the RPAC series, and have already at the Berkley Center and in the SRE Hub developed and launched one piece on El Salvador that came out a few months ago with a launch event then. Forthcoming is on Sudan, and in the coming months we should have Syria available as well. And they were developed at the request of U.S. policymakers, but we found, based on general feedback, that they can be particularly useful as a tool that policymakers and practitioners in different spaces, particularly vis-a-vis U.S. foreign policy, can better understand the history and the main actors and stakeholders vis-a-vis religion in a given conflict context, pre and post conflict. With that, I'll turn back to Peter and look forward to the discussion. Thank you.
Great. Thanks so much, Melissa. It's really encouraging and heartening to know that that institutional and documentary record of U.S. government efforts to engage religious actors is being preserved. And I hope those joining us today will take the opportunity to visit the Strategic Religious Engagement Hub at Georgetown's Berkley Center to see and make use of some of those resources in the hope that they'll be able to support the ongoing efforts of those joining us today. I think it'd be good to pivot the conversation now kind of towards the future and the question of what's been learned over the years of doing this work and how we might think about opportunities to rebuild these capacities in the future. So I'd like to turn first to and invite my friend and former colleague Dave Hunsicker to reflect on those questions. Dave, over to you.
Great. Thank you, Peter, and thank you to CFR for this opportunity to take part in this webinar today. It's great to be together with former colleagues like Peter, like Knox, and Melissa. If to think about, where we're going to go, we definitely have to, as Peter's question suggested, think about where we've been. And, Peter's introductory remarks talked about some important milestones, whether it was the 2013 strategy that was developed by the White House, or, our 2023 policy that we put out. Those have been important guidance documents that have helped to point people in the direction of doing this work better. But it always had a starting point of doing this work. From the very beginning, work in the development space or the peace building space, in the diplomatic space, has required working with religious actors in some way, shape, or form. As we would routinely say in our trainings, the faith-based actors are the first ones in and the last ones out. And oftentimes they never leave. They're the ones who are the abiding presence, and they're the ones who we have to be thinking about where do we have common cause, where we can support their efforts, and where those efforts can also be beneficial to our development goals or our diplomatic goals. And, those are some of the main themes that resonated across these different documents. And one of the reasons why we felt the need to really capture them in documents like our most recent policy was that, a lot of this stuff happened in a really ad hoc way over the years. There was very little centralized place of knowledge, nor was there a consistent application of what we knew and what we had learned. So we really needed to, kind of get it in one place so that we could use that in order to build on moving forward, and so that we could start to routinize doing this kind of work or strategic religious engagement with our partners around the world, when and where appropriate, and giving guidelines about when and where it is appropriate. It's usually appropriate. The question is, what's the level at which you have that engagement? And sometimes it's not easy to know. And so your Foreign Service officer operating in Mozambique, who's on their first tour, they perhaps didn't have the tools immediately at their fingertips to be able to easily answer some of those questions. So the thinking behind a lot of these efforts was to be able to encapsulate some of that and make it available to the people who are going to need it. And I'm really I really think it's important to emphasize, how bipartisan that effort had been over the years. It was Democratic administrations and Republican administrations that were, seeing this need and answering the need to the best they could. And, for example, the work on USAID's policy began under the first Trump administration. And it was under the leadership of Kirsten Evans in the faith-based office and Administrator Green in the front office, who were really pushing us to do that and to gather the evidence, have an evidence summit. But that work had to carry on into the Biden administration. And while the policy ultimately came out in the Biden administration, it was the product of both Republican and Democratic administrations, and reflected the long history of USAID's work in this space. And that's important, I think, because we don't want to think about this as a partisan issue, particularly as we look forward. Yes, a lot has changed in the last year or so, and the capacities for USAID to be able to do this work no longer exists. We'll have to see what comes out of the newly launched Bureau for Disaster and Humanitarian Response at the State Department. I think one of the things that we'll particularly have to grapple with as a community moving forward is that the overarching structure of that bureau is very much responsive. It's about the humanitarian response and the disaster response that has always been part of what the U.S. government has done in these spaces, but it's one that doesn't always lend itself to the long-term relationship building, which was really at the core of what we were trying to capture through the policy and the 2013 strategy. And so grappling with those challenges, I think, is going to be important. And one of the key constituents in that process, alongside the faith-based community, is going to be the business community. Because, while USAID may not be there on the ground doing longer term development work that contributes to resilience in society so that we don't have to be in a position where we're responding to disasters or humanitarian emergencies, some of which, of course, are always going to be unavoidable. But in order to make sure that markets are accessible and that new markets are being grown, I think it's going to become natural for the business community to kind of pick up some of the slack that has been created by the fact that USAID is no longer there. USAID had a catalytic role. It was never going to be the one creating the markets or really being able to do all of the work that needs to be done on the ground in countries around the world. It was always going to require a variety of different actors, which included the private sector as well as faith-based actors. So that catalyst may not be there anymore. That was the vital role that public investment played, was to be that catalyst. But I think, there is enough knowledge that's kind of been captured that can hopefully be of service to the private sector as it tries to perhaps replicate some of the work that the U.S. government was doing in this space. And it is, of course, my hope that the realization will come that the whole system is more efficient when the U.S. government is there to play that catalytic role. And so I think, there's a good argument to be made for continued public investment in this space and the guidance that the U.S. government can play, but also recognizing that, the real weight behind the success of these efforts is going to come from the private sector, working with those faith-based actors who were the first in and are always going to be the last ones out.
Great. Thanks so much, Dave. Before we turn over to our last speaker, I just wanted to remind our audience that it's our intention for this to be an interactive session today. And so I'd like to encourage you to get ready to ask questions. If you look in the chat box, you'll see that our colleague Sam has provided instructions for how to ask questions. And scrolling through the list of participants, I can see so many familiar names, former colleagues, people who themselves have played such important roles in helping to develop and build this work over the years. And so we're very much looking forward to hearing from all of you. So finally, let me hand things over to Knox to help us think through questions about what the future might look like for this space, but also maybe to help us have a nuanced inflection in terms of how we think about the relationship between religious freedom and broader engagement with religious actors. So, Knox, over to you.
Great. Thank you so much, Peter, and thank you, Arena and CFR. Sort of the bottom line up front is the system, such as it existed before the second Trump administration, was never designed in any kind of thoughtful way about how all the pieces would fit together. And so there was a lot of dysfunctionality. And so the moment we're in with this drastic changes in US government positions allows us to think about what is a way to create a system where we can engage religious actors strategically to advance US foreign policies, to advance American values. And so I'll be putting a few ideas out during my brief presentation. I come from the human rights side of the shop, focused on international religious freedom. Of course, it's been operating on its own in a US government capacity since 1998 and had a decade and a half of growth and expansion before the Office of Religion and Global Affairs was established in 2013. And so the IRF space, we had our own distinct actors, our own distinct lexicon, our own distinct policy tools, our own distinct funding that allowed the State Department office and the commission that operates externally to really pursue and think about how best to advance this core American value of religious freedom in a way that advanced American interests. When RGA was established in 2013, there was a tip of the hat to the issues of religious freedom being part of how the U.S. government needs to think about religious engagement, but it started to create more silos. The RGA office operated distinctly and independently from the IRF office. At the same time, the Department of Defense was thinking about we're fighting these wars in these religiously imbued contexts in Afghanistan and Iraq. And they issued new guidance at the time, Joint Publication 105, that allowed commanders in the area of responsibility to deploy their chaplains, their military chaplains, to use their spiritual eyes and ears to help the commanders understand the human landscape. And not for targeting, but just to help them see that other terrain and understand how U.S. service members were fitting into that context. All three of these were in their own universe of actors, their own silos. And I experienced when I was at the State Department, the frustrations of that, and the sum never really equaled more than the component parts, which I think was unfortunate. But now with the closure of USAID, RGA was shifted into the IRF office, rebranded as Strategic Religious Engagement Unit. That's now closed. The IRF office at State has been lowered in the hierarchy, and the office team shrunk. There's not only an opportunity, but a need to rethink about how the U.S. government engages religious actors because they're not going away. While our bureaucratic boxes are changing, religion has an eternal time horizon, and we know based on the Pew Research Center that billions of people look to something beyond themselves to give their lives purpose, meaning, and to help them understand the world around them. So smart U.S. government engagement abroad is going to have create the tools to help us see the religious landscape. So in my article for the Missing Dimension blog, I put some ideas out there about how to think about integrating these silos along security, humanitarian assistance, development, and human rights / international religious freedom, recognizing their distinct areas of operation, their distinct approaches, their distinct universe of partners and activists, but also recognizing there's overlap, that these do touch each other, that an environment where there is religious freedom is going to be an environment where faith communities are going to be better development or humanitarian assistance partners. The military, in trying to quell violence to create conditions of stability, is going to need to know who are the religious actors that are doing the good work in the community on water sanitation or education. So there is overlap. And so I propose thinking about strategic religious engagement not as a unit or an office, but as a theme that each of these areas of emphasis operates and resides within, and having someone, ideally at the National Security Council or possibly in the Office of Policy Planning at the State Department, to be the coordinator, not a czar, not that gets into really tricky institutional prerogatives. The IRF ambassador by law reports directly to the President, Secretary of State. DOD's in a completely different agency. But having someone who is a coordinator who can convene the various actors to share information, to understand opportunities, then also to map who are the religious actors in different key countries that we need to be aware of, and what are their concerns, what are they thinking about, and trying to break down again our bureaucratic silos, because the priest, the pastor, the imam in a particular country, they're concerned about it all. They don't just have the religious freedom box. They're concerned about persecution. They're concerned about education. They're concerned about economic development. They're concerned about it all because they're part of that community. And so while we'll always have our boxes here in Washington, creating this SRE theme with loose coordination can hopefully better position us to do this. Now, at the same time, understanding where the second Trump administration is, I don't see any indication that they're going to be staffing up these offices anytime soon. So that does pose a question, sort of building off Dave's idea about engaging outside of government. So the business community would be one. I would just think of other ways to develop public-private partnerships, such as with the Schri Hub here at the Berkley Center, to try to find those people in academia, in university life, and think tanks, in religious life across our vast and varied country that can have that information and expertise that our diplomats, our policymakers, our service members can rely upon, because they don't have the time to get a PhD in comparative religion, but we can develop that Rolodex, to date myself, of people who are ready to lend a hand to advance American interests and values, working with different parts of the US government. So we don't have to recreate the wheel, but rather leverage what exists already, which would be a cost savings. It'd be very quick. And then if the Trump administration or the next administration wants to rebuild, to expand back into these different four areas of work, the key advisors will be known. They'll be in place, and that'll help lead it out quickly. So those are some thoughts about how to use this moment of drastic change to rethink how we did it. It wasn't created any kind of thoughtful master strategy. Now we have the opportunity to do that. I had a couple of ideas I put out there based on my experience. There's not going to be any perfect system, but there is an extreme value that the US government can realize if we have these tools in place and the right people in place to help, again, see the religious landscape and look for opportunities to advance American values and interests. So I'll stop there, Peter.
Great, Knox. Thanks so much for that. Given us a lot to think about, all three of you. And I do hope that others joining the conversation now as we pivot to the more interactive phase of this discussion, which thankfully, we have a good 40 minutes or so for. I hope others will also add their ideas and suggestions to some of the ideas that Knox has already shared. Can already see some questions coming in through the question and answer box. So please do keep those coming. We'll turn to those shortly. But first wanted to hand things over to our CFR colleague, Sam, just to talk a little bit about the ground rules for how the Q&A session will work. Sam?
Thanks, everyone. We will now begin the participant Q&A period. Please click the raise hand icon on your screen to indicate that you would like to ask a question. When you are called on, please accept the unmute prompt and state your name and affiliation followed by your question. You may also submit a written question via the Q&A feature in your Zoom window at any time. And we have a raised hand from Sama Norquist.
Good afternoon, everyone. So wonderful to see former colleagues and friends on the screen. A lot was said. I want to just raise a couple of observations to things that David and Knox said. David, you talked about the structure that we did. There were two pillars, if you will, at USAID. I'm sorry, I'm Samah Norquist, formerly with USAID during the Trump administration. There was the religious engagement, and there was the programming and development and policy, which they overlapped, but we tried as much as we can to keep them separately in order, because while they interact, we wanted to make sure that we strengthen the policy and the programming and the money within the foreign policy apparatus. My question to you, David, is you talked about the business community. I keep remembering and recalling all the signs that rise when you mention the word religion, whether it was at State Department or whether it was at USAID. So I would like you to address this monstrous feeling that people get or reaction when we say religious, either religious engagement or religious freedom. And if I may, Knox, you mentioned the national security position. I think we have a template for U.S. government structure, which is the Frank Wolf International Religious Freedom Law, where in that law, every administration is required to have someone dedicated to the religious freedom agenda at the National Security Council, in addition to the State Department. So I will shut up now. Thank you.
Sure. Great to hear you, Samah. Wonderful to interact with you here and for raising these questions. Yeah, I mean, the allergy to religion was and is real, right? And part of that is, having our own self-awareness as a people, as a culture, as Americans, of, our own history with religion and, how it remains and likely will remain a contested topic in our political life and in our cultural life for the foreseeable future. And so that predictably raises, questions on how we then, given that it is a contested topic, how do we engage with it? And one, approach has been to ignore it because it's just too uncomfortable. And that's, the Thanksgiving dinner table method of dealing with it. Or, there is the constructive way of dealing with it. Or I guess there's three. I said two. There's the third is to, ignore all of the safeguards and the possible harm and just go in with, without regard for what could happen if it's not done carefully. And I've certainly seen both on either ends of the extreme. And what I was most heartened by in the development of the policy process at USAID was that we were bringing it all into that center constructive lane where we were giving people the tools to talk about it, where we were making it clear that this was not about the U.S. government getting into the business of religion. Not our space, not our role. And at the same time, we do have a lot of common areas that we can pursue with faith-based actors around the world. They care about making sure that people have clean drinking water. We care about people having clean drinking water. And we can agree upon that, and we can agree that they're a trusted actor. They already have a presence, and we should think about how we can work together for maximum effect. And at the same time, also looking at, peace building and the role that, religious actors have long played in that space. And when we want to be able to, bring about positive change in a community, we need to talk to those people who have been bringing positive change for a long time in communities around the world. And so recognizing that common cause, that common space where we can partner, is really the essence of what strategic religious engagement is. And I think that's something that, we were able to demonstrate through the policy and the evidence summit that built, the foundation for the policy that really helped to get over some of that religion allergy that I mentioned at the very beginning and that you referenced as well. Is the problem ever going to go away? No, because it's going to remain a contested issue for us as an American people, and in many cultures around the world. Many countries around the world have similar conversations internally all the time. And so it's an ongoing conversation, but it's a healthy conversation to have if you're approaching it constructively and as a conversation rather than as a conversation ender.
We will
just
go ahead.
jump in on Sama's question about the NSC position. I think that's the starting point, but what I was proposing is something that wouldn't solely focus on religious freedom, which is what the law established, but someone who would be able to bridge these different, sometimes competing, often overlapping areas of work in human rights space, development, humanitarian assistance, and military, so that the vast U.S. government has some sense of what it's doing in all these different places, and there's not competing efforts to speak with the same people, but loose coordination so that we can be more effective in our engagements with these key religious leaders.
We will take the next question from Peter John Kovac. Please accept the unmute prompt.
Hi. Well, thank you. I'm glad to see Knox and Peter and David, all of whom I've known. I really agree with what Knox has been saying about internal structure, but I have a feeling that this is one of those moments where the outside players, an interfaith consortium combined with a religion and academia consortium, a little like the group that wrote I think it was the 2010 Chicago report that kind of criticized the government effort. Doug Johnston was at the helm of that. That's, to me, would be a logical step to make sure that in the educational and religious civil society space, we have a consensus and a consortium ready to back a rebuilding within the government, and maybe a sensible one, maybe something that actually integrates well as an interagency group led by an NSC representative. I really think that's right now the way to go in the current vacuum. I also appreciate David's comments very much on what I call religion phobia or First Amendment-itis. We've gotten a lot better at it, I think, over the decades I've been involved, but we still have a ways to go. We're rational, we're bureaucrats. Even if we have a strong spiritual practice, we put it in the can as we walk into our bureaucracy, and the like. Just a rational bias, and also a bit of paranoia, which I think is disappearing, especially since under President W. Bush, the so-called rule was established in 2004, which was a very sensible body of regulations drafted, I believe, by the USAID Council General at the time, that applied to all our work, including mine in public diplomacy. Anyway, I'll shut up. Thank you.
Peter, it's great to hear from you and to have you as part of the conversation. In addition to thank you for those comments, I wanted to also take a stab at the very important question you raised in the Q&A box about training. All of us on this call know and have been aware that one of the greatest questions we faced is how do you inculcate the necessary religious literacy among American foreign policymakers and diplomats, equip them with the knowledge and skills that they need to do this work effectively. Some of you there will be aware that since 2011, the Foreign Services Institute has been fairly regularly running a week-long course on religion and foreign policy. It's less present in the current curriculum, but one of the perpetual challenges we faced is just the question that, when you have that precious limited bandwidth of training time available, what do you fill it with when it comes to the question of religious literacy? What are the right kinds of things to teach during that time? Because as I think your own question anticipates, another approach to this whole issue would be, rather than having dedicated policy-making offices in different institutions, just offer some component of religious literacy training to all incoming Foreign Service officers so that they already enter their roles thinking about and looking for opportunities to engage religion. So I agree that kind of figuring out that training piece is crucially important. I'm not entirely sure, given the amount of competition there is for the limited bandwidth in the A100 Foreign Service training class, that any mandatory instruction in religious engagement is likely. But I think we can think of other creative ways to do that. Make sure that outgoing chiefs of mission, our ambassadors, before they reach the countries they're going to be serving in, are given briefings in and are aware of and know to be asking the staff who will be working under them to be thinking about these kinds of questions. I also thought we had reached an important next level to some extent in this work in the last couple of years before the current administration, when the State Department and USAID had jointly developed an entire week-long course called Working with Religious Actors in Diplomacy and Development. And what was unique about it is that it was delivered out at specific U.S. embassies around the world based on expressions of interest from those embassies and missions. So it gave us an opportunity to kind of hear where the demand signal is and then to tailor training that was specific to those needs. But I'm grateful to you for raising that key question. I wanted to see if any of our other panelists had anything else that they wanted to add to the training point before we move on, Sam, to the next question. Melissa, did I see your hand there? Yeah.
Yes, I'd be happy to respond to that question and very much appreciate it. Peter, you mentioned the USAID State Department training that was developed and rolled out only within the past couple of years. There's another training, in fact, for a series of 4 action guides that the U.S. Institute of Peace had developed with a couple partner organizations, the Network for Religious and Traditional Peacemakers and Salam Institute for Peace and Justice. They were developed over about the past decade on, one is a religion and conflict and peace building analysis guide, and one that focuses on religion and reconciliation, one on religion and mediation, and one on religion and gender in peace building. And they were developed for religious actors and those who seek to engage them and help go through a series of questions in each of those contexts, and are intended as both a training tool, but also something meant to be operationalized by various stakeholders. Again, religious actors themselves who want to be working in peace building, as well as those who want to work with them, including policymakers. And so over my years at USIP, I helped to develop and adapt trainings around them, including for US policymakers, short versions that were included in one-off hour-long training sessions that colleagues and I offered at the Foreign Service Institute, for example. But I'm also aware that US military chaplains have used them, including through trainings that I had adapted, and that they continue to be used, especially the analysis guide by chaplains to help better understand sort of the lay of the land in a new context, to help prompt certain questions in different contexts vis-a-vis religion. When you get to a new place, how can you think about religion in those dynamics? And at the moment, with the Berkley Center through the SRE Hub, and in partnership with former USIP partners, I'm actually assessing how toolkits like those action guides and including those action guides are continuing to be used by different stakeholders, including policymakers within the US government, and what opportunities are there for either similar toolkits, other trainings, what else exists that's being used, because there are a lot of resources like that. There still remains a need for resources like that to help better understand and contextualize religion in peace and conflict dynamics, as well as development and diplomacy. And it's an interesting moment and something that I'm excited to be doing a little bit more listening and learning about too, and welcome others' thoughts on that space. Thank you for the question.
We will take the next question from Samira Sadiq with the Center for Earth Ethics. Can you speak to the role that the multilateral and UN system can play in taking leadership at this point in time?
Oh, Samira, this is a fantastic question. I'm so glad you raised it, because I think one thing we want to be careful is to not give the impression that the U.S. government is the only official actor that has taken an interest in religious engagement. Any number of other donor agencies, both bilateral and multilateral around the world, have been crucially involved in supporting various forms of a partnership with religious actors and faith-based organizations in the development and humanitarian realms in particular. Some of the specialized agencies of the United Nations, such as UNICEF, the World Health Organization, the World Food Program, have also been, I think, really important contributors to this work. And so I think at a moment like this, when the institutional capacity on the US side is a little bit more anemic than it has been in the past, and when the United States has been pulling away somewhat from its multilateral partnerships, I think we will need to be relying more than ever on our multilateral partners to continue working to develop these capacities and these agendas. We have some platforms that have sought to do that. I think in particular of the international partnership or of PARD, the International Partnership for Sustainable Development, for Religion and Sustainable Development, that was largely convened by the government of Germany as an important multilateral space that brought together official donors, faith-based organization, and academic experts. And so I think right now we really do need to be looking at and thinking about what the next phase of the multilateral story is, and what the appropriate American role in that is. I don't know if Knox or Dave or Melissa, if you'd like to add anything to that.
Just a quick addition thought. The issues I was identifying in the U.S. government, interagency lack of coordination, also exists at the multilateral level. The examples you were giving exist in their own area of operations, separate from the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, the Special Rapporteur for Religious Freedom. And so I think there's also a need at the multilateral level to create some better coordination among development, humanitarian assistance, and human rights / religious freedom. I mean, UNHCR is the closest one I think that bridges it, just because one of the 5 recognized criteria to be a refugee is a fear of persecution based on one's religion. And so that then brings together a lot of other actors that work on humanitarian assistance for people fleeing religious persecution or persecution on behalf of their belief or non-belief. But generally, there's been a lack of any kind of networked approach similar to the U.S. government. So I would suggest a similar thought process take place at the UN level and also at the regional level.
We will take our next question from Thomas Uthup. Please accept the unmute prompt and state your name and affiliation.
Hi, this is Thomas Uthup, UN Alliance, Friends of the UN Alliance of Civilizations. Thanks to CFR and the participants, some of whom are, of course, familiar to me, for this fascinating discussion. My perspective and consequent questions comes from not being a participant in U.S. diplomacy, but as an observer of U.S. foreign policy, my academic interest in religion, and my practical experience working with religious issues at the United Nations. and Peter mentioned several of the agencies. I was on a task force that did attempt to do some coordination. It was led by Azza Karam, who I don't know if she's on this call. Anyway, but my question is that whether from a U.S. foreign policy perspective or international relations perspective, understanding the functions of religion in society requires some knowledge. Now, you could think of many functions of religion in society, but I collapse them into three broad categories: communicative, executive, and evaluative. From the discussion, what I gather is that from the participants' experience in the US NGO and governmental space, it looks like the evaluative functions are most developed and best understood. For example, religious freedom, there's a long history. But the communicative and executive functions need more work. So my first question is, do the panelists agree with my assessment? And the second question is, if political leadership and knowledge are important for institutionalizing SRE, because it seems like, with administrations coming and going, they seem to fall apart or get strengthened. So if the political leadership and knowledge are important, doesn't the lack of knowledge of many of the upcoming and current leaders pose a real problem? Thank you.
Thomas, thanks very much for the question, and I appreciate you also calling out and recognizing the crucial leadership of Azza Karam in the multilateral space in terms of her convening of that very important interagency task force within the UN system. As for the other elements of your question, let me see if any of my co-panelists would want to offer any reflections or responses there.
I can jump in and respond at least in part. I mean, thinking about the different functions of religious leaders in particular in strategic religious engagement, very rightly point to what the evaluative element of it. But I think one of the difficulties in terms of the executive and the communicative, if I'm understanding your framework correctly, the executive element that religious leaders in particular have, or religious communities more broadly have, is kind of at the heart of kind of the first stage of religious engagement that oftentimes U.S. government actors or private sector actors would take, in that they recognize the authority that those communities or individuals have, and they seek to engage specifically with that in order to find, like I was saying earlier, that common space where that relationship between the religious actor and the U.S. government and its respective partners can be maximized to everybody's benefit. One of the downfalls, I think, on the communicative side is that there was a period in the United States government's religious engagement where I feel there was an over-reliance on that communicative role, in that there was a desire to push out messages and only seeing religious actors as proxy messengers. Like, we want to say this. We think if a priest or a rabbi or an imam or other religious leader says this on our behalf, it'll strengthen and amplify our message. But it was very instrumental in how it was oftentimes approached, in that it wasn't arriving at that common ground that could then be amplified on both sides as common ground, but rather it was viewed as we want them to do our bidding. I think as the U.S. government, we matured quite a bit around that, and we're in a good place in terms of thinking about that in a little bit more nuanced way through our trainings, through the policies, through just doing it more regularly. And to your point about knowledge, that's, you don't do any of this without knowledge. So Melissa talked about the religious landscapes, which, were incredibly important tools. There were other, assessment processes that were used across the government, some of them formal, some of them informal, to get at some of that knowledge, and raising religious literacy for foreign service officers or others who are going into these spaces to work is incredibly important. And, I think the lack of knowledge, and even not knowing what you don't know, can be exceedingly harmful when trying to engage in this work. And so, yeah, I share your concern with, how this can be done in a do no harm way moving forward, without having, that constant reference to what we know and what we need to know before we start embarking too far down that path.
We will take the next question from Bhikkhu Bodhi with the Buddhist Association of the United States. Is the promotion of religious freedom really driven by a concern for human rights, or is the underlying motivation to create a channel for Christian evangelicals to proselytize in countries that have typically been closed to Christian missionaries? When I hear talk of American interests and values, this sounds suspiciously like a proselytizing effort behind the talk of religious freedom.
I'll take that one. I mean, at the core of it, you think about what does international standards provide or identify as constituting freedom of thought, conscience, religion, or belief. It's the freedom to have any faith or no faith, to change faith, free from coercion, to share your faith with others, to decide for yourself what's ultimate truth and what's going to guide your life, to share that with your children, without fear of discrimination or violence on behalf of government or others, and the responsibility of the state to protect that right, to ensure individuals can enjoy this human right. So part of that is sharing. If someone feels motivated out of a religious passion to share their experience with others, that is protected by Article 18 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and Article 18 of the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. If people feel motivated to say someone else's faith is wrong or all beliefs are false, they also have that right. So I never saw the work of the U.S. government as advancing a particular dogma, a particular faith, but rather empowering individuals to decide what is ultimate truth for themselves, and to allow for the free flow of religious information without penalty. Does that mean Christians who proselytize are able to do that? Yes. Does that mean those of other faiths can also proselytize? It also means that as well. And it also means those who have no beliefs can share that freely in a society. And what we've seen is when countries protect this right, they're more stable, they're more prosperous, they're not at war with themselves, they take advantage of all their citizens towards the betterment of their societies. And that's in U.S. strategic interests. When the world's a peaceful place, when people are able to bring their whole selves into public life, into the workplace, those countries are going to advance and they're going to be better partners for the United States. So I do think, as I said many a time, that religious freedom is one of those issues where this core American value, this part of the American experience that I think that is unique, really does align with American interests. And so advancing this isn't about privileging one faith over another, but rather privileging the right of individuals to decide what's truth in their own minds and to live that out peacefully.
We will take the next question from Guthrie Graves Fitzsimmons with Interfaith Alliance. In future administrations, what would it look like to take a proactive approach to opposing religious nationalism at home and abroad, and naming it as a threat to human rights and other American interests? Could we connect Christians against Christian nationalism in the U.S. to people in majority religions abroad who oppose the use of their religion to harm religious minorities and distort it for power?
So, thinking about this issue, I don't think that it's the place of any particular U.S. administration to support or oppose religious nationalism, just because I don't think that anything called religious nationalism is necessarily inherently a problem. It's really a function of whatever we call religious nationalism produces in terms of potential threats and harms to the human rights and the safety and the welfare of people. So, for example, I could think of, from my perspective at least, an American nationalism thoroughly imbued with an interpretation of Christianity that all is about reaching out to and helping the other and welcoming the stranger. And that's a religious nationalism that I absolutely would not want to oppose. So I'm not sure that sort of setting up religious nationalism as the problem and then deciding to take a position for or against it is the issue. Rather, it would be about focusing more specifically on the human rights risks or potential harms that come from the policies or the values or the doctrines that any particular group might embrace. And then we obviously have a vast architecture of international law and practice to engage with that. So that's the legal side of it. The political and geopolitical side of it, though, and this is anticipating also to some extent a question that was put forward by Nicholas in the Q&A box, which is about the fact that one thing that U.S. religious engagement efforts will have to contend with going forward is the fact that there are a number of great powers active on the world stage that are deploying religion as an instrument of statecraft, that are using religion as a wedge issue in order to stoke intercommunal tensions in certain countries, to foster and portray countries that they're competing with as representative of certain values that are not consistent with their own. And so I think we're entering into an age in which the deployment of kind of various forms of morality projects has increasingly become part of the geopolitical terrain. Religion is directly implicated in that. And I think then that the future of religious literacy for diplomats also needs to be about figuring out how to navigate in this increasingly complex terrain.
We will take the next question from Cecilia Mowat. Please accept the unmute prompt and state your affiliation.
Good afternoon and thank you. I'm Cecilia Mowat with Strategies Insight, a former board member of the Episcopal Church Foundation, and I'm really thrilled to be here and hear this question and this conversation, because what someone meant for evil, God meant for good, is a good thought to have in a situation of chaos that has been created by the dismantling process of the current administration. It gives us a time, as you say, to look at who should we be working with on strategic religious engagement. And I'm curious about the definition of a religious actor. And I think, Dave, you're involved in an organization that makes the voters the donor. We used to say at ECF, the pips, Jesus and the pips, the people in the pews. When do we move this discussion down to the people in the religions or non-religions? And how do we take things like Melissa's storytelling blog and take advantage of the social media tools that are out there, AI or whatever you want to say, and use the tools that we've got to push down some of the training tools, the guides, and education and communication without going into manipulation and making it transactional, but ingraining and inculcating in seeding the revolution towards utilizing who we each are as individuals to be able to engage with other human beings and learn our common humanity, whether it's looking at the interreligious movements or whatever. And then the next question with that is, to what degree do we use the various denominations and their arms of international engagement, global engagement, like Episcopal Relief and Development? I see we have some people on the call that are from various religious groups. We must make sure that we utilize their channels too. So I'm curious of how you are thinking about the ways to spread the stories that you've got, because people don't know about them, that could be acting and that could be voices that say to their senators and representatives, this is important to us. Please restore it. I'll leave it at that. I could go on about, but I just have this passion for realizing, I think who said it, religious actors are going to still be there. Knox, you said that, and they're concerned about it all.
Yeah.
People are in their homes concerned about this right now as we watch a war happening. We haven't talked about that, and I know we don't have time to, but that's the question in a general sense. How do we use social media, use regular media, use tools that we can take those stories that Melissa is creating and disseminate so that we've got soldiers in the field?
Thank you. Peter, you are on mute. I don't know if you were trying to, there you go.
No, I mean, Cecilia, I deeply appreciate what you've just offered, and certainly have some initial thoughts in response. But I saw Dave also was coming off mute, so I want to yield to him.
Yeah, just real quick, beautiful reflections, and thank you for the question. And there's obviously a ton to unpack there. But just in brief, one of the limitations that and the U.S. government has in interacting with religious actors, and religious actors being a broad category of basically anyone who identifies either as either individually or as an institution with some religion, philosophy, etc. So it's a broad concept, but as an institution, the United States government is an institution. The UN is an institution. And, so the natural counterpart is, of course, the institutions, whether, as you mentioned, other religious denominations or religious hierarchies of various sorts. That's the natural interaction point, is institution to institution. And then you have individuals within those institutions who are having the individual conversations and individual interactions, but all of it has to aggregate up into something broader than just decisions made by those who sit on high in any institution, or and at the same time, it also has to raise higher than the one-on-one interaction that you can have with somebody over a cup of tea, right? And so it's finding that ability to bring those two ends together to bring about real change, whether that's in peace building or whether that's in positive health outcomes or education outcomes, what have you. It's really about engaging that middle, and you have to work from it from both directions in order to bring that about. It would be my very abbreviated answer based on where we are at time.
And I know there's one more question that Sam wants to try to fit in, but Cecilia, your really important reflection there, I think, also points very importantly to a fundamental limitation in terms of U.S. or any government's engagement with religion, which is the fact that, there are the functional capacities or functional aspects of religion, and those are the ones that governments tend to want to engage with, right? You're a faith-based organization that has the ability to reach certain segments of a population that we want to get to with a health intervention, so we'll work with you. Or you're a religious organization that has the ability to influence a segment of the population, right? That's functional. There is, of course, however, the this is a term that's reflective of specific faith traditions, but I think folks will understand what I'm saying here. There's also the prophetic function of religion, right? The ways in which religion puts forward radical, in the sense of fundamentally transformative visions of what social order, what justice might look like, in ways that can be very threatening to governments. And so, I think that both of those aspects of religion and the sort of tension between them in the context of government engagement with governments is something that we kind of have to keep in mind as we move forward in this work. Sam, do you think we can fit in one last question?
We can hand it back over to Irina.
Thank you. I don't know if you want to make any closing remarks, Peter, for the last couple of minutes or minute of our time here.
Well, I just wanted to, first of all, thank you, Irina and CFR, again for making this conversation possible. Our fantastic co-panelists who, in addition to the work that they are doing now from their respective perches, each represent or have a personal history within one of the key agencies that's been involved in building these capacities over the years. But I think most of the richness of the discussion today has come from the really unique audience that we've had in terms of people who have been participants themselves, have seen what works and what doesn't work. And I was just really struck by the quality of the questions and the provocations that we received that I think are going to be incredibly valuable as we all work together to continue developing this work going forward. So our thanks to everyone.
Thank you very much, Peter, and to the Berkley Center for bringing us this opportunity to convene Melissa Nozell, David Hunsicker, and Knox Thames. We really appreciate hearing about the work that you're doing in this area. And I am sorry that we could not get to all of your questions. There are many more in the Q&A and raised hands, but we will just have to have you all back to have a second turn at this topic. So again, thank you to Peter Mandaville for his involvement in the CFR's religion initiative over the years. And we encourage you to write us at religionprogram@cfr.org with suggestions or questions for future webinars or discussions, etc. And we appreciate your being with us. So thank you all and have a great remainder of the day.
This concludes today's webinar. You may now disconnect.